They started calling me Legacy Jim right around the time the new CEO decided my 23 years of network security experience was somehow holding back innovation. Not James, not Mr. Carpenter, not even the senior network architect who built every firewall they depend on, Legacy Jim. My name's James Carpenter, I'm 49, and I've been hardening networks since these kids thought Wi-Fi was something you yelled when the internet went down. I spent 6 years in the Navy keeping communication systems running on destroyers. Then another 23 years at Vanguard Systems building their infrastructure from a 50-person startup into an 800-employee defense contractor. But apparently, that makes me a bottleneck. The whole thing started when old Howard Hoffman decided to retire and hand the keys to his nephew Bryce. You know the type? 31 years old, Stanford MBA, talks about digital transformation like he invented electricity. First week on the job, Bryce called an all-hands and used the word synergy 14 times. I counted because counting helps me stay calm when the temperature starts rising in my chest. We're going to flatten hierarchies and eliminate legacy bottlenecks, he announced, scanning the room with the confidence of someone who's never had to explain why the server farm is humming at 2 a.m. on a Sunday. His eyes landed on me for about half a second longer than comfortable. The message was clear as a network topology diagram. See, Vanguard isn't some Silicon Valley startup where you can move fast and break things. We handle classified defense contracts, air traffic control systems, emergency response networks for 6 different government agencies. Break something here and people die. But try explaining that to an MBA who thinks legacy infrastructure is just another bullet point on his modernization slide deck. I've seen this movie before. 12 years ago at my previous job, they brought in some hotshot consultants, ignored everyone over 45, and watched their entire network get compromised by a phishing attack that a decent firewall would have stopped. I got laid off anyway because restructuring. Took me 8 months to land the job at Vanguard, and I swore I'd never let some kid in expensive shoes make me feel obsolete again. The first real warning shot came during our quarterly budget review. Bryce had brought in some consultant named Reed Walsh. One of those guys who wears expensive sneakers to boardroom meetings and calls everything legacy like it's a terminal diagnosis. Reed had been shadowing our operations for 2 weeks, taking notes on his tablet and nodding knowingly at things he clearly didn't understand. Jim's been fantastic, Bryce said, not looking at me, but we're implementing some exciting changes to optimize our DevOps pipeline and leverage cloud-native solutions. Reed nodded enthusiastically, his trendy glasses catching the fluorescent light. The current architecture is very traditional. We're recommending a complete migration to AWS with containerized microservices and automated deployment pipelines. I adjusted my monitor angle. Old habit when the temperature starts rising. Those systems handle classified data streams. They're air-gapped for a reason. You can't just containerize national security, right? But that's legacy thinking, Reed said, like he was explaining algebra to a kindergartner. We can achieve the same security posture with modern encryption and zero-trust protocols. The DoD is moving everything to the cloud anyway. Zero trust. Kid was talking about zero-trust architecture for systems that require physical key cards and biometric scanners just to enter the building. Systems that process intelligence feeds from submarine sonar arrays and satellite reconnaissance data. I kept my mouth shut, but I made a mental note. Reed Walsh didn't know the difference between network security and network theater. After the meeting, Danny Rodriguez, our CTO, caught up with me in the hallway. Danny and I go way back. He was Air Force. I was Navy, but we both understood what it meant to keep critical systems running when lives depended on them. That was interesting, he said, glancing around to make sure we weren't overheard. Interesting's one word for it. I was organizing the pens in my shirt pocket. Another old habit. How much you want to bet Reed's never worked with classified systems? I'm not taking that bet. Danny lowered his voice. Howard asked me to keep an eye on things during the transition. Between you and me, I think he's starting to have second thoughts about this whole succession plan. But Howard was in Florida now, playing golf and pretending 30 years of building government contracts could be handed off like a set of car keys. Meanwhile, his nephew was turning our security briefings into TED Talks about disruption through innovation. The second warning came 2 weeks later when I got excluded from the infrastructure evolution strategy sessions. 23 years building these systems, and suddenly I'm not qualified to discuss their future. Danny slipped me the meeting notes later, and there it was, in black and white. Transition legacy personnel to advisory roles. That's corporate speak for we're putting you out to pasture. I started staying late that week, not because anyone asked me to, but because I needed to understand exactly what Reed and his team were planning. I pulled up every infrastructure contract we'd signed in the last 3 years, every vendor agreement, every service level commitment with our government clients. If they wanted to push me aside, fine. But I was going to make sure they understood what they were inheriting. That's when I found what I was looking for. Our master service agreement template lived in a shared folder that legal rubber stamped without reading if the revision log looked routine. I'd written most of these technical specifications myself over the years, buried deep in appendices where only engineers bothered to look. Section 7.3, subsection C, right after the standard security compliance language, that's where I made my addition. All critical infrastructure deployments and system modifications require explicit authorization from designated senior network architect James Carpenter or written successor designation. Nothing flashy, just a technical requirement that sounded like standard cover-your-ass language. The kind of clause that protects companies from liability when contractors make stupid decisions. Legal approved it without question. Procurement didn't even blink. Within 6 weeks, that single sentence went out in every new vendor contract for government work, which represented about 80% of our business. I also made some other small adjustments while I was in the documentation. Backup protocols that required my security clearance to access. Network segment authorizations that needed my digital signature for any modifications. Emergency recovery procedures that only I had fully documented, stored on encrypted drives in my desk drawer. Standard stuff that any competent network architect would implement to maintain system integrity. Reed, meanwhile, was busy impressing Bryce with demos of dashboard widgets that looked like video game interfaces. He'd set up a war room with multiple monitors showing real-time threat visualization, basically expensive screensavers that turned network traffic into colorful bubbles floating across black screens. The consultants loved it, made them feel like they were in a movie about hackers. This is the future of security operations, Reed announced during one of his presentations, gesturing at screens full of animated charts. Real-time threat hunting with AI-powered anomaly detection. I was sitting in the back, quietly organizing my cable management kit while he talked. The truth was, those pretty visualizations were pulling data from systems I'd built 15 years ago. The actual security happened in boring text logs that scrolled by too fast for humans to read, processed by monitoring scripts I'd written in my spare time, and refined through countless midnight emergencies. But Reed didn't know that to him. Security was whatever looked impressive on a 4K monitor. The first crack in their digital transformation appeared 3 weeks later when Reed tried to migrate our email servers to the cloud. Simple project, he said during the weekly status meeting, just lift and shift to Office 365. Modern cloud infrastructure, better collaboration tools, reduced operational overhead, all the buzzwords lined up in a neat row. What Reed didn't realize is that our email system wasn't just email, it was integrated with 14 different classified databases, automated security alert systems, and emergency communication protocols that had to meet specific DoD encryption standards. You couldn't just plug it into Microsoft's data centers and call it secure. I could have warned him, should have maybe. But Reed had made it clear that my input wasn't welcome in the modernization process. So I sat back and watched him schedule the migration for a Friday evening, timing it to minimize business disruption. The migration failed spectacularly. For 6 hours, nobody could send or receive email, including automated security alerts from our intrusion detection systems. The encrypted communication channels with our government clients went dark. The Pentagon's automated status reports stopped coming through. 3 different agencies called our emergency line, asking if we'd been compromised. Reed's team worked frantically through the weekend, but they were trying to troubleshoot systems they didn't understand, using documentation that assumed knowledge they didn't have. By Sunday night, they were talking about calling in Microsoft's enterprise support team, which would have meant explaining classified government integration requirements to third-party contractors who didn't have security clearances. That's when Danny finally called me at home. "Jim, we need you to come in." Thought Reed had it under control. Reed's team has been working on it for 30 hours straight. They're talking about involving outside contractors now. You know what that means. I knew exactly what it meant. The moment we involved anyone without proper clearances in fixing our classified systems, we'd be in violation of about 12 different federal regulations. Our government contracts would be suspended pending investigation. Vanguard would be done as a defense contractor. I put on my jacket and drove in through Sunday evening traffic, past strip malls and gas stations, thinking about the irony of it all. Reed was trying to modernize us into irrelevance, but he needed the legacy guy to save his modern solution. The office was eerily quiet except for the humming servers and the sound of frustrated consultants arguing in the conference room. I went straight to my workstation, pulled out the encrypted backup drive I kept in my desk drawer, and started the restoration process I'd documented 3 years earlier. 23 minutes later, every email system was back online, encrypted channels restored, security alerts flowing properly. The government status reports resumed their automated schedule. Reed looked like someone had explained quantum physics using hand puppets. "How did you?" He started. "Experience," I said, ejecting the backup drive and locking it back in my drawer. "The same experience you've been trying to modernize away." I expected some gratitude, maybe a grudging acknowledgement that the old systems existed for good reasons. Instead, Bryce called it a learning experience and told Reed to iterate faster next time. No mention of the fact that their iteration almost cost us every government contract we had. That's when I decided to stop volunteering solutions. If they wanted to learn the hard way, I'd let them, but I wasn't going to clean up messes I wasn't invited to prevent. Over the following months, I watched Reed's confidence grow like malware spreading through an unpatched system. He'd survived the email disaster and somehow spun it as proof that their modernization approach was working. We identified critical vulnerabilities in our legacy infrastructure. He told the board, "This validates our cloud-first strategy." The real test came in early March when Reed announced the crown jewel of his transformation: migrating our entire classified data processing system to what he called a hybrid cloud environment. This wasn't email servers or collaboration tools. This was the core system that processed intelligence feeds for 6 different government agencies. The thing that absolutely positively could not go down without triggering congressional hearings. I sat in the announcement meeting and said nothing, just organized the cables behind my desk while Reed explained how containerized microservices would revolutionize our throughput and enable horizontal scaling for dynamic workloads. Half the room nodded along, like they understood what he was talking about. The other half stared at their phones. Danny kept glancing at me from across the conference table, waiting for me to speak up. I didn't. They'd made it clear that my opinion wasn't welcome in these discussions. They had consultants now, expensive ones with PowerPoint presentations full of industry buzzwords. After the meeting, Danny cornered me near the coffee machine. "You're really gonna let them do this? They didn't ask my opinion?" I said, straightening my monitor cable for the 3rd time that day. "They've got everything figured out. Jim, you know this is going to be a disaster. That hybrid architecture they're proposing creates a bridge between our air-gapped systems and the public internet. It's like installing a doggy door in Fort Knox." I poured coffee from the pot that had been sitting there since morning, tasting like burnt rubber and regret. Maybe Reed's right, and I'm just legacy baggage. Maybe 23 years of keeping these systems secure doesn't count for anything in the age of digital transformation. Danny stared at me for a long moment. "You've got something planned, don't you?" I didn't answer directly, but I did start backing up critical system documentation to encrypted drives that night, just in case someone needed the real configuration files after Reed's team finished modernizing everything into smoking ruins. The migration went live on a Tuesday morning in March, rolled out during what Reed called a controlled deployment window. I was drinking coffee from my Navy mug, reviewing overnight security logs, when I noticed something interesting in the network traffic patterns. Reed's hybrid cloud environment was creating exactly the security vulnerability Danny had predicted, a bridge between our classified systems and the internet. But I didn't say anything. I just logged the anomaly in my personal notes and continued monitoring. The attack came 72 hours later. Every monitor in the building started flashing red simultaneously. Not the yellow alerts we got for routine maintenance issues, or the orange warnings for suspicious but contained activity. Deep red alarms that meant someone was inside our network, moving through systems they had no business accessing. I watched the intrusion detection logs scroll past in real time, following the attacker's path through our infrastructure like breadcrumbs through a digital forest. They'd compromised a third-party API that Reed's microservices depended on, then pivoted through the cloud interface directly into our classified database servers. Textbook lateral movement, the kind any network security professional would see coming from orbit, the kind that our old air-gapped architecture made literally impossible. Within 2 hours, the attackers had identified our most critical servers. Within 4 hours, they'd encrypted every file on 6 major systems and dropped a ransom note demanding $2.3 million in Bitcoin. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what they'd copied before encrypting everything. Classified intelligence data belonging to the Department of Defense. Satellite reconnaissance imagery, communication intercepts from ongoing operations, the kind of information that gets people killed if it falls into the wrong hands. This wasn't just a ransomware attack anymore. This was a national security incident. The conference room filled up faster than I'd ever seen before. Bryce, Reed, Danny, half the executive team, and some very serious people from various government agencies who didn't bother introducing themselves. Everyone was talking at once, pointing at whiteboards covered with network diagrams that looked like subway maps drawn by panic-stricken engineers. How long to restore from backups? Asked a woman in a dark suit who'd shown up without explanation. Reed cleared his throat, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. Well, the backup system was part of the cloud migration. It's also encrypted. The room went silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of servers still running in the data center. Working servers that couldn't access any of their data. What about offline backups? Danny asked, though I could tell from his tone he already knew the answer. Those are legacy systems, Reed said, his voice getting smaller. We deprecated them as part of the modernization initiative. They weren't cloud compatible. That's when everyone looked at me. The legacy guy sitting in the corner with his 23-year-old Navy mug, quietly listening to the sound of careers crashing in real time. Jim, Bryce said carefully, like he was defusing a bomb, "Do you have any suggestions?" I took a slow sip of coffee, set the mug down precisely in its usual spot, and adjusted my monitor angle one more time. Old habits die hard, especially when you're about to detonate the rest of your career. Maybe, I said. But according to the infrastructure contracts Reed signed over the last 8 months, all critical system recovery operations require explicit authorization from the designated senior network architect. Reed frowned, looking confused. What contracts? I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a folder. Not thick, just 12 pages. Copies of every service agreement Reed had signed since he'd arrived, each one containing Section 7.3, subsection C. The clause that gave me exclusive authority over infrastructure recovery operations. These are vendor contracts for all the classified systems, I said, sliding the folder across the table. Every single one requires my authorization for recovery operations. Reed signed them without reading the technical specifications. The woman in the dark suit leaned forward. Are you saying you can restore the systems? I'm saying I have offline backups of everything, stored on air-gapped drives that update nightly through automated scripts I wrote 3 years ago. But the contracts Reed signed make me the sole authority for recovery authorization. Bryce's face cycled through several colors before settling on a pale shade that matched the fluorescent lighting. Jim, obviously we authorize you to begin recovery immediately. Actually, I said, pulling out another sheet of paper. According to Section 7.3, authorization can only come from the designated senior network architect. Reed's consulting agreement specifically transferred infrastructure authority to his team. Reed looked like he was trying to swallow a golf ball. That's just bureaucratic language. It doesn't mean anything in an emergency situation. That's a legally binding contract, said Patricia Sullivan from Legal, who'd been reading over my shoulder with growing interest. Reed's team has operational authority over the new systems, but they can't authorize recovery operations without the designated architect's clearance. The government woman checked her watch with the precision of someone counting down to a missile launch. How long do we have before this becomes a congressional hearing? 6 hours before we're required to report the breach to oversight committees, said another government representative who'd materialized from somewhere. 12 hours before this hits the news cycle, Bryce turned to me with the expression of a man watching his inheritance catch fire in real time. Jim, what do you need? I stood up slowly, straightened my monitor one final time, and looked around the room at faces that had ignored me for months. Reed with his expensive sneakers and empty promises. Bryce with his MBA confidence crumbling like a poorly configured firewall. The consultants who'd spent more time making presentations than understanding the systems they were supposed to modernize. I need Reed's resignation letter, I said. I need written authorization to restore the original air-gapped architecture, and I need my job title changed to Chief Technology Officer with full infrastructure authority. Done, Bryce said without hesitation. And I want 7% equity in the company, vesting immediately. The room went quiet again. You could hear the servers humming in the distance, waiting for someone to make a decision that would either save the company or bury it. Bryce looked at his Uncle Howard, who'd driven in from retirement the moment government cars started showing up in the parking lot. Howard nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Done," Bryce repeated. I walked over to my desk, opened the bottom drawer that hadn't been touched in 2 years, and pulled out a ruggedized external drive labeled Classified Backup, March 2024. The kind of drive that could survive an electromagnetic pulse or a direct rocket hit. The kind of preparation that comes from 23 years of expecting the worst and planning for it. I plugged it into the secure terminal and entered my clearance code, the same 12-digit sequence I'd memorized during my first week at Vanguard. Muscle memory from thousands of emergency logins over the decades. "Give me 4 hours," I said. 3 hours and 47 minutes later, every system was back online. The classified databases were restored to their pre-attack state. The air-gapped architecture was rebuilt with proper segmentation. The intelligence feeds resumed their automated processing cycles. The government oversight teams nodded approvingly and left, without saying goodbye, which in their world counted as high praise. Riyadh cleaned out his desk that afternoon, packing his expensive gadgets into boxes with the quiet efficiency of someone who knew he'd never work in government contracting again. His team of consultants followed like ducklings, their cloud-native transformation dreams dissolving into LinkedIn updates about pursuing new opportunities. Bryce sent out an email about organizational realignment and leveraging our most experienced technical leadership, the kind of corporate language that said everything and nothing at the same time. But the message was clear. The legacy guy wasn't legacy anymore. Over the following weeks, things settled into a new rhythm. They stopped calling me Legacy Jim and started calling me Mr. Carpenter or CTO, or just Jim if they were feeling friendly. My new office had a window overlooking the server farm, where the real work happened 24 hours a day. I could see the blinking lights through the reinforced glass, each one representing a system that kept people safe. Ride's replacement was a former Air Force network engineer named Sarah Torres, who actually understood the difference between innovation and security theater. She asked thoughtful questions about our existing architecture before proposing any changes. She read technical documentation instead of just looking at the executive summaries. She understood that in the defense contracting world, boring reliability beats exciting instability every single time. Bryce started asking my opinion before making technology decisions, not because he suddenly respected my experience, but because he'd learned the expensive lesson that ignoring expertise has consequences. Real consequences that can't be explained away with buzzwords or PowerPoint presentations. The equity package became official 6 weeks later. 7% of a company that I'd helped build from a 50-person startup into a major defense contractor. Not bad for someone who was supposedly holding back innovation. But here's the thing I realized during those long nights restoring our systems. I never wanted to destroy anyone's career. I just wanted them to respect the work. 23 years of building something that actually protects people isn't legacy thinking, it's foundation thinking. It's understanding that beneath every modern innovation sits a bedrock of boring, reliable systems maintained by people who take pride in doing things right. The attack taught everyone a lesson about the difference between modernization and recklessness. You can improve systems without throwing away everything that works. You can embrace new technology without dismissing the knowledge that keeps critical infrastructure running. Innovation builds on experience. It doesn't replace it. Ride and his consultants thought they were upgrading our security. What they actually did was create an expensive vulnerability that nearly destroyed everything Howard spent 30 years building. They confused complexity with sophistication, dashboards with security, and credentials with competence. These days, when I review proposals for system upgrades, I look for evidence that the people making recommendations actually understand what they're changing. I ask detailed questions about failure scenarios and recovery procedures. I insist on maintaining offline backups and air-gapped systems for our most critical data. Some people call it paranoid. I call it professional. The servers are humming quietly in their climate-controlled room, processing data streams that help keep the country safe. The network segments are properly isolated. The backup systems are tested monthly. The security logs are monitored by humans who understand what they're looking at. Everything works because experienced professionals built it to work, then spent years learning how to keep it working. Sometimes the old guard isn't guarding against progress. Sometimes we're guarding against stupidity. And in a world where everyone's rushing to adopt the latest trend, Somebody has to ask the boring questions about what happens when the trend doesn't work. You want to know the real difference between legacy systems and modern ones. Legacy systems were built by people who had to fix them when they broke. Modern systems are built by people who move on to the next project when something goes wrong. I've been fixing networks for 29 years now, and I plan to keep doing it until someone builds systems that don't need fixing. Based on what I've seen from the latest generation of digital transformation experts, I'll probably die at my desk. But that's fine with me. Someone has to keep the lights on while the consultants are busy disrupting everything. Stay sharp out there. The network is only as secure as its weakest administrator, and the world is full of people who confuse innovation with competence. Don't let them upgrade you into obsolescence. Your experience matters more than their PowerPoints.